of streets. As part of the Sustainable Futures Project, which you may recall is all about sustainable funding for park services. The current levy that we're implementing is one part subsumed by the Sustainable Futures Project. And really the key there is around funding sources first and foremost, since as you all may recall from the report that we in Forestry did with the Davie Resource Group, our estimate is somewhere around $17 or so million per year for the city to take on that new service. So just letting you know that's still out there and going. Third item, I wanted to speak to the Pedestrian Design Guide update since you will be discussing that today. So as I've reported on previously, including just last month, Urban Forestry has been very involved in the project that PBOT is leading there. And in fact, the tree-friendly elements that you're seeing in the proposed version that PBOT has put forward are the result of Urban Forestry's work in that regard. And we have also proposed and asked for more tree-friendly components than you're seeing as well. For example, proposing a 4-foot minimum pedestrian zone rather than a minimum 4-foot furnishing zone, or as Catherine Marshall says, treeway. But I wanted to make sure you're clear on that because it looked like discussions that were being had and emails were going around saying that Forestry wasn't involved, and that's not accurate. So I want to thank also Casey Jogerst, Brian, Rick Faber, Nick Desai, Angie DeSalvo, and all of our tree inspectors who continue to be involved on top of their regular duties with projects like this that are very impactful to trees but come from other bureaus. And I work on those myself as well. Streets 2035 is another example. So is the employment opportunities update that Brian is representing us in with BPS. Fourth item, I think you all saw Lorena's email. And thank you so much to Lorena. She has been a great asset for all of us in forestry, urban forestry, as well as I believe to the commission. And she's served a few years on the commission. In addition, she's also been working on the Parks Board, also a volunteer with urban forestry for some time. And now she's a professor at PCC. I think you all know that. And we are still connected through that. And I hope that we'll all stay in touch with Lorena. And I certainly will continue to send job opportunities and paid internships and those sorts of things her way. Fifth item. I wanted to give some New Year's priorities for forestry. I know in future meetings, we'll be talking about commission priorities. And it's important for us to try to align what we're working on. We get more done if we're working together than we are if we're working on separate and disparate things and spreading our energies out. So all of our program areas are continuing, of course. In addition to those, our priority in 2022 is levy implementation. And that includes many different aspects. Organization structure and functions, a lot of hiring, onboarding, team building, and culture work, space. We have to figure out where to put people and things. And also, separate from that, we do have that Title 11 amendment project in progress right now that Nick Desai and Brian are leading for us. And we're still hoping to get that to council sometime around June. So everything else is still going on too, but the levy implementation is the biggest thing that we have to focus on, which leads to my sixth item. And that was a reminder about what the focal points are for the parks levy. And reminder, it includes developing a proactive park tree maintenance system, which we have never been able to do, and it's super exciting. Also improving our regulatory resources so that we are quicker on delivering permits and things like that. Also being able to do code compliance functions, which has been a real challenge without additional resources. So that's a second area. A third area that we're focused on for the parks levy is community tree stewardship and partnerships, focusing on low income and low canopy areas of town and with traditionally marginalized communities that have been underserved by government. So centering those folks who need those services most. Also Forest Services expansion and equity, and that includes planting. And finally, creating and advocating for policies that are positive for the city's trees and future. And that includes things like pedestrian design guide update that I mentioned earlier and several other projects that are in the works. And our vision continues to be a city in a forest, not a forest in a city. And to that end, I wanted to let you know that in less than a year, because of the operations levy, we've hired 11 new, didn't exist before at all, positions, which has been a huge, huge asset for us to move those goals forward. And there are currently many more in progress. And a reminder that just getting those folks hired, onboarded, outfitted, oriented, trained up, and ready to really do the work they're hired for does take time. We also are getting other resources to do the work, primarily new equipment, vehicles, and specialized equipment for tree work, which also takes some time. All of that said, the levy implementation, I think, is going quite well. Final thing, since there are so many job opportunities coming for urban forestry as well as the rest of parks, it's pretty hard for me to keep giving you all the specifics of those. So instead, I would ask that if you are interested, or if people you know are interested in work with urban forestry and would improve what we're able to do in our team, direct folks towards the city's career center, where one can sign up to get regularly updates on job openings for all city bureaus, including in urban forestry. And I'll put that link in the chat once I find it at some point during the meeting. That's my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Now I can see you.
Okay, Megan, question?
I had two questions. One, Jen, I don't think I got the email from Lorena.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and it looks like others didn't. So news to me. And it sounds like she's departing, unfortunately. I just wanted to clarify that I don't think.
Yes. Thank you, Megan. I'm so sorry. I thought it had gone to more people, but apparently it didn't. Yes, Lorena is departing from the commission. I think I can share the email with you all. I don't see why not. I don't think she'd mind. I'll double check that and make sure, but it's all, you know, she's got a relatively new position and a lot of work to do. She identified also all the things she's been working on for the commission and other things with urban forestry. So it's a really positive departure, I think. And I wish her all the best, but yes, she's stepping off. And that means, I know you got an update with the email that Brian sent about the agenda about recruitment. And so we will be heading into interviews soon. Now we will have 4 vacancies. That's a lot to fill out of one recruitment cycle. So we'll just have to see how that goes.
Jen, and then my other question was just, you know, as we continue to hopefully talk more about the city and street tree maintenance, you know, in my job, right, I have a lot of conversations with folks that kind of aren't aware of the issue. And then when I bring it up, right, I think they're kind of like, what do I do, right? Like, how do I move this forward? And I always tell people, like, you really need to go to the powers that be, right, to really encourage this. But I didn't know if there was a better answer to give, right? I often say, right, go to the heads of X and X bureau, talk to city council, bring it up. But is there a better answer to give? I want to mobilize more people. So that's my quick question.
Great question, Megan. Thank you. I think you have given the best answer. I don't think coming to urban forestry and telling us, so trees at, we know, and we give the same answer every time. And we don't have a good way to really forward the volumes of concerns and complaints we get to the people who make decisions. So that's not the best venue. You all are not the venue. You all are empathetic, but you don't have power to change it really. So we do the same thing, Megan, that you're doing. Our tree techs do that. They will advise people that they always have the opportunity to connect with their elected officials, who are ultimately the ones that make decisions about big city policies and budget. And I will add that when I've seen a lot of messages go to city commissioners, there's interest.
Right. And Megan, I'll just quickly comment. My own perspective is that we really need to be thinking about how to develop a movement around this. Like, this is something I think that there are a lot of community-based organizations that I think have a lot of potential capacity and interest in wanting to move on this, and I'd love to get us a bit more aligned with their interests and kind of not individuals per se, but movements to be able to get the attention of commissioners, city commissioners.
I'll add to that too, that in my experience and in my position, I think it's really helpful to focus on priorities, identify what the priority is to really promote with folks. And that's something that I think the commission would do well with. And I know that's an upcoming meeting where you will talk about your goals for the year and focal areas. Having many at one time is too diffuse. It means there's less impact. And it's very important also for the commission and urban forestry to be aligned on what we're working on for the same reason. So we'll be working on that in the future.
Great. Thanks, Jen, for that report. You were scheduled to go to until 11, but I think that's a typo. Go until 10.
I don't want to talk that long.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions. I have no doubt we could fill that time asking you questions.
I am sure, but I'm going to guess no. Yeah.
Yeah. We got other stuff to take care of here. I want to transition, if there are no other questions for Jen on the forestry report, transition to the heritage tree nominations. This is a time of year where our heritage tree committee, which is a Title 11 committee, puts forward a set of nominations that the committee has considered for us to vote on. And I think there's a vote at the end of this, if I recall correctly, listing these as heritage trees across the city of Portland. Jen, you have a clarification?
I think so. And Greg and Brian can help me out. I'm pretty sure that the Heritage Tree Committee is not in the code. Rather the Urban Forestry Commission recommending trees to list or delist to council is in the code.
Oh, I see. Okay. So the committee itself is not. Okay, Barbara?
I just checked the code and that's what Jen said is correct.
Okay, so it's not a code, it's not a Title 11 committee, but we are responsible for putting forward this nomination, which our committee is essential for being able to do. So Greg, can I turn, I think I'm turning this over to Greg to facilitate the conversation. Yeah. Greg chairs the Heritage Tree Committee and has done so for several years.
Yeah, thank you. This is actually great.
Vivek, you are still cutting out just a touch, but you're understandable, at least for me, but you are cutting out.
Okay, I may turn my video off just now. I don't know, it's the first time I'm hearing of this, but I will cut my video out just to save bandwidth. Go ahead, Greg, turn it over to you.
Okay, yeah, thank you. We didn't actually come before you last year. And before I get to the presentation, which Brian will be bringing up and will drive, I kind of have a preamble to sort of explain how our process was different. Then there's going to be actually the presentation. Following the presentation, I'd like to hear your comments, answer your questions. I do need a motion and a vote. We actually are the committee that saves you from going to see all these trees, but we enjoy doing it. But we did it in a different way because of the pandemic, so I'll explain that. And once we've done that vote, I'd like to bring up a couple of issues that had kind of been simmering with the committee, and I alluded to them in the chat. It is a place where there are a couple topics we'd like to have further discussion, and we need your input because essentially this is a decision that the Urban Forestry Commission makes. And so we actually need your input on a couple of ways that we weigh these heritage tree nominations. So as you can imagine, pandemic really messed up how we normally work. Typically we would have 2 days, even 3 days, 1 year of tours of a lot of nominated trees. And so our last in-person meeting was February of 2020, which I mean, it's going on 2 years. I'm glad we hadn't had our last meeting in the fall because it would be even longer. But we were anticipating our May 1st deadline for nominations and thinking about, the outreach that we normally do, because the committee actually, I think, is part of the success of finding great new heritage tree nominations. And once the pandemic struck, we couldn't really go and knock on doors. And in fact, I sort of just let the committee pause. I didn't bother anyone until about May, when we knew that we had 21 nominations. And then in June, I was trying to figure out how we would actually tour them safely. It ended up being kind of a moot point because staff had been shifted in ways that the inspectors didn't actually get out and do the inspections. And I'm going to kind of repeat some things that some of you had heard a number of times, but the first step after the nominations come in is for them all to be put on a spreadsheet. That's something that Gina Dake did for us. She's now in a different position, so Nick Desai will do it in the future. But that becomes the list that the inspectors use, and those are Frank Kwasik or Dan Gleason. They are assigned to the Heritage Tree Program, and they have the most familiarity with heritage trees. And they basically go out and look at all trees that are nominated so that the committee doesn't. We've never seen all the trees that were nominated until this 2-year period, in which I actually went and looked at all of them, and it's time consuming. But they look for trees that are nuisance trees. They're on an official City of Portland list. They cannot be heritage trees. We sometimes have trees nominated that are outside the city. So our program is so great that people want to be designated a Portland heritage tree, even though they're not in Portland. We had 2 of those in this 2-year period. They also, more importantly, determine that the trees have enough growing space, both above and below the ground, and they have reasonable health and pretty good structure. Although we have seen some trees that, given their age and the type of tree they are not as sort of beautifully whole as you might expect. Well, when that work didn't get done, we couldn't actually tour. So the 21 nominations just went on hold. And I checked in with people kind of to see how they were doing. There were work adjustments, keeping their families safe and fed, and all that we all endured. About a year later, it seemed as if people had the energy and things had cleared up enough that they were again interested and able to give some attention to heritage trees. So we did our first Zoom meeting, and I'm really glad I didn't have to run it, but Gina helped there. And foremost of our concerns was, could we still do any outreach? Could we knock on doors? And we decided it was just inappropriate, that people really weren't likely to open their doors, and that it probably just couldn't be done safely. And we just see what nominations had come in. We were pretty confident, since we already had 21, that we'd get at least as many more. And I think that's an important point to bring up. This program is now well known. And although I think the committee finds some better candidates, I'm really pleased that so many people love and appreciate their trees and see the Heritage Tree Program as a way to honor them and protect them. So we decided that since we're likely to have 40 or more trees, and we'd probably be driving individually to them, that we didn't want to see all those trees. We knew the inspectors would cut out some of the trees because there wouldn't be space, or they'd be not in good shape and so forth. But they ended up tasking Gina and me with doing a preview of all the trees. And this reflected something we did the year that the Multnomah neighborhood nominated 21 trees, and it put our total up around 56 or so. And 9 of those were Douglas fir trees. And so the staff person at the time and I went out and looked at all the trees in Multnomah neighborhood. We figured out the 3 best of the Douglas fir trees. We eliminated some trees that were just too small. And that's what the committee wanted to do. They reminded us collectively, a particular person said that there were sometimes trees that we were visiting where he didn't even want to get out of the car. It was just, that was the tree that was nominated and it was too small. Just, there was no way, unless it was horticulturally significant, which it wasn't, or maybe had some history and that didn't mean that like it was planted for a kid's birthday or something, that we should be spending our time seeing those trees. So we had 2 years worth of trees, 56 trees in 40 some sites, I think. And because there are a couple of places where you've got 2 trees, 3 trees. In one case, we had 5 trees in a park. So it's the number of sites we're visiting that really takes the time. And Gina and I did this discussion by going to the trees individually. We also had John Mills, who lives in Southwest, go with a family member so he could safely measure all the trees. And I had kind of compiled where we have a history of heritage trees of that species, sort of what the dimensions of the existing heritage trees were. And Gina and I basically put up our pictures. We used Google Maps in the street view to sort of circle around the tree in some cases. And she actually served as the inspector. So she had that right to exclude some trees. And I think, you know, quite honestly, and not to critique her, but Frank has done it for more years. And I think he's confident in the arborists of the committee being reasonable about growing space. And we may have been, I think, if anything, we might have been a little conservative on the damage that some large street trees do to sidewalks. We see even medium-sized trees of different species doing that damage. But the important thing to remember about trees in the right-of-way is that if they're designated a heritage tree, urban forestry then maintains them. And then eventually someday the tree will fail. They also bear the cost of that removal. So urban forestry has that right to be very careful and very exclusive. But I was sorry that the full committee didn't get to see a couple trees that were really kind of impressive. And I'm really happy. I was glad to spend the time seeing them all myself, because now I understand the urban forestry process inspection much better than I did before. So we did our discussions by Zoom. The committee were given about half of the 18 trees to look at in 2 weeks. Then we did a call, brought up the pictures, used Google Street View. You could not vote unless you had actually seen the tree. In a couple cases, people didn't get to all the trees. In the second round of trees, we had someone get sick during the process. We actually did a third call because there was one tree that not enough people had seen. Many of our decisions actually were unanimous, so that sort of showed the quality of the candidates that moved forward. But in the cases of this one tree, or actually it was a pair of trees, it was pretty clear to me that we had kind of a split vote. And so the 3 people that hadn't seen the tree were allowed another 2 weeks to go and see it. We only forward our recommendations to you if we have what we consider a substantial majority. It's not defined anywhere. We use basically 2/3 of all the people who can vote. On occasion, there's a land use case where an inspector has to recuse themselves. Other cases, actually, we had one this year where one of the committee members knew the person who had nominated the tree. And other instances, sometimes we've got an arborist who's cared for the tree, and they can give us their information on the history of the tree, but they can't vote. So we had, I guess, one case in this 2-year package. So to summarize and kind of give Brian a heads up on getting the PowerPoint up, we had the 56 nominees. They were actually in 45 sites now that I see my notes. There are 9 trees that we're recommending for heritage tree status, and I'll be straightforward, that is lower. And I went back to look. In 2019, we had 52 nominations. So that shows the extra nominations that probably the Heritage Tree Committee helped bring into play. And they were in 32 sites, and we had 13 heritage trees that we recommended. that included getting consent from the owners, because a private landowner not only needs to sign the nomination form, but then when they get the word that we'd like their tree to be a heritage tree, they actually have to sign a consent form. And that's when they promise to take care of the tree. They acknowledge that they'll have to get a permit for any pruning. They learn that urban forestry arborists will, answer questions for them. But as we saw last month, they are also constrained in terms of when a designated tree can be removed. So we don't always get consent. And this package actually is the maximum number of trees, because a couple of schedule things and staff changes, we do not have consent for the 5 private trees that are in this list. But we'll get it, hopefully. And then I thought, well, maybe in 2019, that was a higher number of proposed heritage trees, but I looked to the prior year and that there were actually 12. So I just, before we get into these specifics, I want to relay that I'm concerned that we are losing trees. We will continue to lose trees. We have trees that have been in the Heritage Tree Program for over 20 years. And, they were already large and old when they were designated. So we really do need your and the public's help to find the future heritage trees and basically to steward them. So I am really pleased that parks will have the money to take better care of those trees in the right of way that they care for, and as well as the park trees and those in public lands, because we've all seen that the maintenance of these large trees is expensive but critical. So this is the presentation. I'll do a short form of this before council, because they usually put us at the end of the agenda as kind of a high point to their day. And then they cut us short because they've had all this public comment at the beginning. That's, if you've ever been to a council meeting, it's over every subject under the sun, and not always really pertinent. But at any rate, let's roll the slides, Brian, to the next one. I always start by showing and acknowledging where the heritage trees are and are not. We're now up to 7 heritage trees east of I-205. We still lack even 1 heritage tree in many neighborhoods. I do think we've improved on the diversity of species. We've improved in the diversity of locations of our committee members, which is one of our strategies to finding more potential nominations. But if you know people in any of those South Portland neighborhoods or the very north ones by the Columbia River, which, have the airport and a couple of major natural areas, and certainly East Portland, we can't be everywhere. And there's a lot of accidents to history. I think one of the messages to council is that large trees do need large spaces. And some of the wealthier neighborhoods have those larger lots. May not remain that way with the residential infill project, but for the time being, this is where the trees were collected, or they were in orchard remnants, or perhaps nurseries or tree collections by wealthy owners. So next slide. Shows us actually where the nominations came in. Those are the orange dots. And in some cases, there were multiple trees at those dots. The ones with the yellow stars are where the proposed heritage trees are. And this is the first time actually we've shown you where the designations will need to be removed. I think it's actually just a good place to show that we lose them over the entire city, not just in one particular neighborhood that's maybe vulnerable to icy storms from the Columbia Gorge or something. It's against the backdrop of neighborhoods. We will revise this map. We've got a new GIS technician, and I like how they sorted the neighborhoods, but then the next version of this map will show the neighborhoods that have no heritage trees in white, just so they really pop out. Currently, that light green has 0, 1, or 2 heritage trees. And I always do feel that a heritage tree or a neighborhood should have maybe at least 2 heritage trees, because otherwise they're just a storm of way of having only one. And again, Irvington is the champion there, and part because there's one species of tree that they have multiples of. But again, large lots, big trees, big homes, and the people with the money to take care of them. And we lucked out. We actually, even with only 9 heritage trees proposed, we have at least one in each neighborhood. In the past, we've done some plaque celebrations. I don't think we're going to be able to do that this year or for these 2 years, but we do like to keep the program in everyone's awareness by having those celebrations. So now on to the bad news, which is the places where we need to remove the designation. Now I have to thank Nick Desai. He did a terrific job putting the draft of this presentation together and finding a lot of little bits of data that I needed. He thought you should actually see the code. And that reminds you that we need at least 6 members of the Urban Forestry Commission to remove this designation. We can get the next slide and we'll go into those. There are a couple of these that I'm not going to discuss because you actually did that. So some of them, these 5 removals, were because there was an emergency removal permit. So city forester can do that for trees that are hazardous. This one you guys considered. The only thing that's different here is that I've just kind of condensed the material to one slide. So you see the tree when it was beautiful and then what happened to it. And when we get rushed by city council, I think these 2 before and after pictures should kind of do a lot of the speaking for me. So the next slide. Again, we're going to be down to just 2 native dogwoods. We'll be down to just 2 pin oaks. This is one that you also processed. Next slide. And I kind of hate to show these slides of big trees coming down because I know it can scare people. We have several trees that succumbed to an ice storm. This actually was a private tree. It's next to 2 others of the same type, heritage trees. Number 198 and 198 are also Quercus garryana. This one literally had ice and just went over completely. Big loss. And losing any one of these Gary oaks really hurts the committee. Although we kind of love all of them, but there's something really majestic about these. So next slide. And this was one that I didn't actually remember. I had heard about it at the time. This was in my former neighborhood. And we're going to be down to 1 big leaf maple. This one, I calculate, is about 173 years old. It's in the Lone Fir Cemetery, also damaged with the ice storm. It has a plaque there at the base, you can see, and it celebrates, it was planted in memory of a particular person. So that's why we know the year it was planted. There are a couple of these removals that were kind of done retroactively because a tree came down. This was in another public space and they just needed to, actually it's an intersection of paths. So they needed to deal with it quickly. So another big loss. If you know of any big leaf maples, please let me or a committee member know. The final one is this lay spark pine. This is one that the current Urban Forestry Commission weighed in on because it was designated in 2017. It's on that site that had been a nursery for 2 generations, and it actually has 7 heritage trees that remain. This at the time was the only tree of this species that we knew in the city. So we just don't have any lay spark pines at all. And that includes our several arborists, as well as Martin Nicholson, who usually, can weigh in and tell us how, a nomination compares to what he's got in Hoyt. And at least at the time, he didn't have a lace bark pine in Hoyt Arboretum. So I'm hoping that this particular landowner being devoted to these trees might plant another one. We'll have to wait and see. So again, this was a tall, slender tree. I think the ice load was just heavy enough that it kind of levered it over and the whole root plate failed. So again, another retroactive removal permit. So now that was the bad news. And 5 is a lot to remove in 2 years. We've gone from, I think, 1 to maybe 3 in the other years where I've done this presentation. And it's why I really try and focus on us finding new good nominations. Here's the code for the designation. Again, we need at least 6 of you to support it. And this is where that code language about the tree's health, the aerial space, and the open ground is actually specified. And these trees all make that standard and then some, I'd say. So first, trees. These are actually of horticultural significance. I don't think I've mentioned the reason a tree can be qualified to be designated, but they are that it's large, it's old, it's connected to a historic person or event, or it's horticulturally significant. We really are trying to find more heritage tree species and even cultivars. And these are actually fairly small trees, but they are the largest of their type in the city. Martin's got one. Martin, for those of you who don't know, is the curator at Hoyt Arboretum, and he's incredibly knowledgeable about trees and always kind of noticing new species here and there. And these turned up in the street tree inventory. And I think Julie Fukuda, who nominated them, kind of kept them in mind, probably looked around for any others and ended up finally nominating them. So the way these slides are arranged is that we've got the common name and how many trees we are nominating in that space. And then we have the scientific name and how many heritage trees we currently have without the removal of the designation or the addition. So this is before you take action. We have the dimensions, and because this goes before council, we give them circumference because that's what Title 11 uses. And I point out that this number is not that big, 28 and 30. So this rare species would be kind of vulnerable to our code. The records for heritage trees are kept in terms of diameter, breast height, usually in feet. This is one exception because they're not really girthy trees. We give the height, the spread, we tell you the address and whether it's a right-of-way tree, a private tree, a park tree. And there's actually a public tree, which are any trees on public land owned by the city of Portland, but not managed by the Parks Bureau. And then we give you their neighborhood and how many heritage trees they have. In some cases, that neighborhood's really important to us because they don't have any heritage trees. This is an overlapped area, which is kind of unique. It's claimed by 2 neighborhoods. So it would give Sabin 3 heritage trees, and then Irvington would go up to 33, which is there the champion neighborhood. So again, a lovely species. It seems to be coexisting with those communication wires. It will only mature at 45, 50 feet. So we think this designation would bring a new, more diverse type of street tree to people's attention. So the next tree. This is a Doug fir, and you can see that we already have 7 of them, but this one would be in Pal Gilbers, which has only 1. It's also really visible and sort of fully kind of has the character that these trees get when they're grown in the open. It's not the very biggest of the 7. It's sort of in the upper middle range in terms of its dimensions. But we really liked its visibility. And we've got an environmental historian, Dave Hedberg, on the committee. And he pointed out that this is actually a great tree because it's an example of one of the many Douglas fir trees that gave the name Douglas District to this part of town. And that's why we now have the David Douglas School District. So I just thought that was sort of an interesting bit of history. It's also worthwhile noting that this designation will protect this tree from future street improvements. And I know that's a concern of Bruce and others, that where trees are next to graveled or narrow asphalt, that when curbs and sidewalks go in, the trees might be damaged. This designation will mean that all utilities really need to work around the tree. So we'll be glad that that kind of lengthens its lifetime. Next tree. This one got a new superlative. People just said, wow. This had what we now call the wow factor. And not every heritage tree is going to have the wow factor, but this tree is bigger in every dimension than the only other grand fir that we have. And you can see how big it is in front of what looks like a really small house from the front. It actually got this, the landowner sent us this aerial view he had. So you can see they've added on the house in the back, not damaging the tree. The house was built in 1924. I suspect, and Martin Nicholson concurs, that the tree was probably already quite large at that time and they built around it, preserving it. We do hope they take the street number off the tree, but it's a private tree, and this landowner is really hopeful to get the designation. I think he'll work with us on that. We've actually been very near this tree, but we are on the other side of the tree, looking at a couple of trees that did get designated. We just didn't come out this street, or I think we would have had it designated a couple years earlier. In the notes from the tour, I have like all these superlatives. This was probably the most special tree to us. And it's special in part because the grand fir that we had designated when I came in the program is the one that was removed illegally. You might remember that from 5 or 6 years ago. And so for a couple of years, we had no grand firs. Really happy to find one in Pier Park, but this one is so much more visible. You drive down this particular little street in South Portland and the tree is just right there, and you can actually see the whole tree without trespassing or anything. So next tree. This is another interesting story. And each of these trees has sort of something special to say about them. It's a Western red cedar, and this is a species that we're concerned about. The committee has actually talked about some of the vulnerabilities of these trees to heat and decline. We currently have only 2 heritage trees. So this is like the big leaf maple, another native tree, where we'd really like to find some other great large examples. The message I'll give to council on this tree is that it is possible for big trees to coexist with buildings. Currently, we've got a code provision that allows a tree to be removed really without cause if it's within 10 feet of structure. In this instance, it took Damon, and I wouldn't name him to council, but it took one of our committee members who's actually a master arborist to work up a tree preservation plan with the owner. And they used some special pilings that suspended part of the building, and they did some air spading to find out where the major roots are. So you can see how close this accessory dwelling unit is to this tree. Another thing just about this species in particular that's worth noting is it actually has now 2 trunks, but it's all one tree, and that's a lower branch that went out and was covered by some duff and things that blew in, and then it in turn in time turned and grew up. So it gives it a substantial spread. We actually have 2 heights and 2 diameters at breast height. And this landowner actually is still watering this tree. It made it through the various heat events this summer with just a little bit of scorch. And they might be convinced to go as far as to actually add something that was interpretive that talked about how you could build safely and coexist with large trees like this. You can see that this landowner has preserved a lot of trees. You cannot really see the house or this ADU from the street unless you really look in the right angle. So a fun tree, interesting story. Next tree. This one was a surprise to me because I've actually, when I worked at parks, had projects in Pier Park. This is a park tree and it's hidden away. It's on hole number 4 of the disc golf course. So I hope you go and see it, but I need to advise you to take care when you do because it's right near the beginning of the hole and it's the largest of 4 trees that are kind of in this little depression. And again, Dave Hedberg weighed in with saying that it probably wasn't planted before the 1950s. That's when Katsura trees became more common in the West Coast. But this is really tall for this species. Gina actually did some double checking, and then Martin has actually seen a couple of really large specimens in other countries. And I did a little searching online, and this is actually taller than the current world champion tree. It wouldn't vie for champion status because that's done through a combination. It's really sort of like, how big is the whole tree? You know, its width, its height, its girth, it's kind of like how much wood and how much space. But still, it's a spectacular grouping of trees, and this is the best of them. And we're really happy that St. John's would get another heritage tree. And I think actually it'll get a lot of visits, even if it's people that are playing disc golf. So I can picture this with yellow leaves amidst all the conifers, which actually are the reason that it's grown so tall and fairly narrow. So next tree. We're just a couple from the end. This is another pair of trees, and this is the tree that took another bit of time to have 3 more people visit. Because as we did our discussion, it was apparent that we didn't have as many people had seen this tree, and there was some debate whether 1 tree should be designated or 2 or neither. It actually is quite good in terms of dimensions in comparison with the other 4 deodar cedars. But it's unusual in that you can see these branches that sweep down to the ground. And one of our committee members, Ginger Edwards, does a lot of heritage tree tours. She also does tours up at Hoyt. And she says a tree like this where people can actually touch the branches and see the giant cones will be like a real highlight on the trip. So these are unusual because they've, unlike other deodar cedars, they've never been limbed up. So the house is on the left side of the lot, and then these 2 trees are on the right side if you're looking from the south, and they are just massive on the skyline. So this would add 2 trees, 2 private trees to the King neighborhood. I think we got just 1 last tree. Again, a big tree. And they're all big in their own way. We didn't have any where history was a predominant feature this year. This would come closest to this because the house there is the Henry M. Grant House. It's on the National Historic Register, which mentioned the tree. And one of the things that I didn't notice when I saw it, but Frank Krosick, one of our tree inspectors, pointed out during the discussion, is this tree, because of its great girth, is now within 10 feet of the tree. So I don't think this landowner, having just nominated it, would choose to ask to have a removal permit, but this tree could be removed basically because of that distance. It is right up there in terms of size. But what we really liked about this tree was just its prominence. It's a landmark in that neighborhood, given its elevation above the street and its 100-foot height. It was actually kind of hard to measure this tree because you had to get so far away. And those of you who have done street tree or park tree inventory where you're measuring the height know how challenging that can be. But next slide, last slide. That's the package. Here's most of the team from the last time we actually took a picture together. I want to point out that Frank is not there, but Dan, one of our 2 inspectors from Urban Forestry, is there. Gina took the picture, so she's not in it. I do want to thank her for 2 or 3 years of really exemplary service to this committee. I know she's much happier, or probably will be, not having to deal with me as much. And she really loves environmental education, which is what she'll now be doing in parks. But we're really happy to have Nick, and I think we'll have an extra benefit with his Title 11 work, being informed by what he's learning about heritage trees. And then Theo Hayes, who lives out in East Portland, is not shown. But this is the team, and I think that they did really great work this year and for last year, given the constraints. And they're actually really antsy to get out and look for heritage trees. We've had a Zoom call where I showed them this presentation, kind of asked for their input and their approval. And then we talked about what we do, how we might be able to do some limited on-site meetings where an arborist actually knows the homeowner. So we have big plans for the coming year, but we are still constrained and not able to have our usual meeting indoors. Everyone agreed to continue on the committee, which is great news. I ask them annually. Brian is our only person who just will not participate in Zoom meetings, but I talked to him individually, and he's a great spotter of potential new heritage trees. So that's the presentation. Let's open it for discussion. Keep in mind that I do have maybe 5 or more minutes at the end where I'd like to address a couple of other things to do with the committee.
Hey, thank you, Greg. That was, as always, just a really phenomenal tour through the city. Thank you so much. I always learn so much with your kind of background in not only individual trees, but the neighborhood knowledge and the kind of cultural connection to these charismatic megaflora. I'll turn it over.
Whole committee. This is not just my thoughts.
Yeah, yes, you are the spokesperson for a large team. Really appreciate your coming and bringing all that to us. Barbara, I see your hand up, and we'll go around and check, see if there are any questions.
Well, I didn't want to repeat, but well done, Greg. And the other thing that I would point out is that we spent an hour on this today, and I think we all benefited from it. So when we actually, we've all got skills, and when we put them, when we talk about things and really get to talk about them, I think it benefits all of us.
Yeah, I kind of wish I did a pre-post of blood pressure before Greg's presentation and after Greg's presentation. I feel like it would have dropped multiple dozen points. Daniel.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. I have a question for you, and it's sparked by one of the proposals where you had 2 trees on the same lot proposed for a heritage tree. And I'm just wondering, what about more than 2 together? I mean, have you ever talked about like a small grove of trees being designated together as a heritage tree? And the reason I'm asking, I also noticed you have a designation a few blocks from my house. I live in Palhurst, Gilbert. It was that Douglas fir tree. And within a mile of where I live, there are several groves of really, really tall trees, all on 1 or 2 tax lots, mostly Douglas fir, sometimes other conifers as well. And just wondering what your thoughts are on like you know, what if you had like 4 or 5 trees? Would that be something you'd ever consider together?
It has been raised. We haven't had an actual nomination where we actually had to put it to the test. I think it would be something that we should consider and be nice to like build it into our protocol. In some cases, we've had like a line of trees. And should the whole street tree planting be designated as a group? There were Caucasian wingnuts up in Irvington. They ended up, it was before my time on the committee, they ended up with just some of the trees being designated. They have individual numbers and individual plaques. And when we were talking about those pair of big cedars, we had a discussion about, we put one plaque on the south and would it cover both trees? Should each tree be designated? And there's a great example of, if you've ever been up to the Portland Audubon site, the park next door to them is known as Upper Maclay Park. There's one plaque on the line of trees that are next to the street. They're Dawn Redwoods. And that whole line is sort of one designation. So they're all protected, but they didn't do, well, there's might be 20 trees. They didn't do a plaque and a number for each tree. So there's no real consistency in the decision. I think as a way to protect a large stand of trees, if a private landowner would be willing, we'd certainly consider it. We know well how these trees and their roots interact. We need arborists to really inform us about that knowledgeably. But what we need is a private property owner who's willing to basically commit to not doing the development that they might. They're constrained then for the future that could. We've had people that it affect their land value and resale. But it would be great to have some large groves of trees protected in something other than city parks, like Mount Scott Park or something. So yeah.
Yeah, it just, that gives me an idea, you know, seeing if we can, maybe not us, but maybe Portland Audubon might be interested to do something like raise some funding, you know, to basically pay a landowner, you know, not to develop by designating heritage trees, multiple heritage trees. And the thing that got me thinking about this one particular grove I know of is that someone who lives on that block, it's like he's constantly posting about different owl species that come, and I've noticed this in several places in, you know, around where I live, is that there definitely are owls that come into, it has to be multiple large conifers together. But that could be an additional benefit.
Well, and those are exactly the sites that are really vulnerable to someone taking down 3 trees a year until there's no trees left. So Megan?
Well, thanks for all the shout outs to my employer. My question was just around, like, you know, Greg, like hearing you every time I've seen you give this presentation, right? It's so inspiring. And I know that there's resources on the website, and it's kind of made me think just a couple of things. One, have we ever considered adding something like a QR code to the plaques as just a quick way for people to be able to go and learn more? And then I wondered, I know there's the database, I just pulled it up, but I wonder if we've thought, I know this is resources, about kind of turning it also into a bit of a storyboard so that, you know, someone can flash a QR code, it shows you more, it shows you where more things are, and it tells you the story of that tree. Like even Daniel, you're just talking about the owls in a tree, like things that help people like understand the history and the connection, like, and more of that, and making it really accessible to do it. I just think that, like, Greg, I just want a version of you to be available to all of the people doing this as they're walking by these trees in an even more readily accessible way. So,
you know, we had that PSU course that I think ran for 2 years. I'm not sure if that professor is still there.
Yep, Catherine McNure.
Yeah, they did some great projects, and
Yep.
I agree. I think one of the things the Urban Forestry Commission should consider, and it won't be up to me to do it, is we did used to have an education and outreach subcommittee, and that sort of faded away when Cathal Mushel went off the commission. And with new staff and whatever their interest and expertise is, I don't think I can ask my committee to do a whole lot more. I do know that we can compile what we have. We have Dave Hedberg, who's always willing to do more research. And we did talk about QR cards. It was 4 or 5 years ago when they weren't as common. And I think probably we'll be waiting to see. I'm kind of waiting till when Martin does it at Hoyt Arboretum. I think the point where he does it, then we'd be able to do it, because that's actually one place we get our plaques made. There's over 300 plaques out there, so they certainly could link to like the OSU landscape tree database for basic information about the trees. That's actually part of what Urban Forestry does. Adding all the extra kind of story information would take a whole lot of work, and I think something for tree stewards or student interns or anyone that's not on the Heritage Tree Committee and already busy. But it's a point well taken. We are concerned about knowledge that we have and then how it gets stored.
Great. Yeah, QR codes have become a lot more popular after the no-touch pandemic system.
That's
Bruce.
Let's see, let me get the handout. It's a comment, I think, after our discussion on the heritage tree, apple tree, and the challenges that were presented to the individual property owner, I have, how shall I express this? I'll go for serious misgivings about the difficulties of a private property owner to remove their heritage trees, given the current guidelines in place. I would certainly not be anxious to encourage a property owner who owned a spectacular heritage tree or potential heritage tree in their yard. I want to be very clear with them that you may not be able to remove this tree regardless of how bad a shape you think it's in. So it's just, I don't want to say it's not a rational thing, but I would like greater clarity and clear communication to the property owner as to what's involved, because currently there is nothing they gain from putting their private tree as a heritage tree except the glory, the personal glory and the satisfaction. But they have to take all the costs. So I just have, I'm not easy with that opinion, but it's really difficult for me to talk to an individual property owner and be able to, in good conscience, tell them, yeah, you want to get that private tree on the heritage tree list.
I understand what you're saying, Daniel. I actually have committed to talking to Mr. Cody. We're really clear, and we've certainly had people that nominated their trees and then hesitated and did not sign the consent form. The form is really clear about what they're promising, and that's the only case that I've been involved in where a landowner disagreed with urban forestry. I understand that urban forestry can think of one other case. That's in 25 years. So I just have to believe, it's kind of like our urban foresters are better than or our arborists are better than yours, but there's a whole range of discussion. And there are certainly things where Title 11 could be improved in regards to heritage trees. So we're actually really glad to have Nick and Brian available to make sure that gets folded into future improvements. If there's no other comments, I do want to have a little bit of time to cover our last few things, but I need a motion and a vote.
It's like Jen has a question.
Mine can wait for after the motion and the vote.
Okay,
My hand went up quicker than that.
so Greg, you're calling motion. Adrian?
Oh, Greg, go ahead.
Well, no, I need someone else on the committee.
Yes, yes, I move to approve the new designated heritage trees as proposed.
And could I suggest that you add the removal of the designation?
And the removal of the ones that have been proposed to remove.
Great. Barbara, is that a second?
Yes.
Great. So I guess hands up in the screen if you support that motion. So I think can vote is voting. So I've got all but one opposed. Hands down, anyone up, hands up if you're opposed. And then if you're just not voting on this particular issue, I think, Bruce, I didn't see if your hand is for that. Okay, so thank you. So it's approved and we will work on going to council. I hope that it's the 9 trees, but again, if we don't get consent formally, we actually get that signed form before we go to council. So Jen, question or comment before my last remarks?
Yes, thank you. So just letting folks know, I was checking on some things in the background here while Greg was presenting, and those trees that are on parks properties, we have a little more process to do within parks on those. So just be aware of that. And also I want to point out that we appreciate the committee, and Greg has been an excellent chair, very engaged and energetic. And I know that in the past, Heritage Tree Committee chairs, I think, have been somewhat overwhelmed in spite of us staff trying to make it a manageable volunteer job. So thank you, Greg, for your outstanding service among all the things that you've done for the city in regards to trees, in particular Heritage Tree Committee chair. And I want to also point out that when Greg's presenting and she's saying a lot of we, which I love, the we includes a lot of staff time. Was Gina, as Greg pointed out, Gina Dake, who's now supervising environmental education programs in parks, which is terrific. And now Nick Desai as the leads. However, there are several other staff who are always involved beyond the tree inspectors. And a lot of the heritage tree program work has to be done by staff because it has legal aspects, administrative aspects, and responsibilities that we can't delegate to volunteers. So just making you aware of that. Thank you to staff in the meantime.
Yeah, it's actually a program. There's a lot of steps in it. Just Nick is learning. So at the beginning, I thought it was great to be asked about future agenda items. And so I had actually a couple. I just figured I'd keep it within this hour part. And one discussion that we've not resolved as a committee and we'd like to discuss and actually show examples. So I'll need to prepare a presentation. But we struggle with how visible a heritage tree is. And we've looked at heritage trees that are on the list. A couple of them are nearly invisible unless they're in bloom. And then you can see the white flowers at the very top of the tree. I think they might have been chosen because they were large and the only ones of their species. There's other cases where the tree is in full bloom. That's kind of a no, or in full view. That's not an issue. But we've struggled with how much of the tree you need to see, because it is sort of something that's of value to the public for education. And so I think the pictures on this will make it more clear. We've handled this on a case-by-case basis, But there are some trees that we did not designate, and I've had second thoughts about them because they fit the criteria, but you could only see the top of the canopy over all the houses. So there was no place where you could see the trunk and the major branches, which are what usually impresses the committee the most. So we're going to want to show you some examples, and that various committees over the years have rejected or selected trees, and that we just need better guidance. And this is important because this actually protects these trees. These ones that you can't see are typically private trees. Their landowners have nominated, they're willing to have them to be protected. They want them to have this constraint to removal by a future landowner. And they're disappointed when their tree that is not visible enough. So given the changes in land use, we really need to talk to you about that. Ideally, I'd like to have that discussion before we do tree tours after the May 1st deadline. So sometime before June or July. And we would wait and hold off our tours a little bit if we could get that feedback. One thing that probably is going to take more time, and again, we need the full commission's guidance on it, is with the changes in land use, is there something in either our bylaws or how we consider it, or perhaps officially eventually in Title 11, that should address the fact that residential infill is making ever more trees vulnerable to removal, and that perhaps our middle-aged trees that would become these elders, or not quite large enough trees that will eventually be large, are really vulnerable to development. And I already pointed out instances where the trees were within 10 feet of a structure. Should that be something that the committee actually weighs? We do it informally, but it'd be great to have some formal guidance. If a tree is within 10 feet of a structure and this would protect it and the current landowner is willing, should that give more weight to designating it? And then, of course, the bigger discussion is as lots with a single family residence are redeveloped or vulnerable to be redeveloped with 3 or 4 or even 5 units if they're on a corner. Should those trees also, we have, as we mentioned earlier, relatively few ways to truly protect trees in this city if someone is willing to pay the price, the penalty for removal. Heritage tree status, even though Bruce is not pleased with that one case, is a way, and that's why so many people, even with our outreach, asked to be in this program, asked that their tree be protected. So we need, I think, a pretty careful discussion about that, and eventually perhaps something would go in the code. I'm going off the commission, a month or two, I don't know. I plan to stay with the Heritage Tree Committee as long as they actually want me, they being both the urban forestry section of parks and my fellow committee members. I'm over in Portland at least once a week, and I do tend to visit heritage trees depending on my errands. Damon also will be going off, but I'm grateful that he's one of the arborists that will remain with the committee. I do want to bring up that we will then not have an urban forestry commissioner on the Heritage Tree Committee. There's no requirement that we do. We haven't many years in the past, as best I can tell. And Daniel, I'll get to you in just a second. But you're going to have several, up to 4 new commissioners over time. I want to recognize that you've got to staff appeals first, and then policy committee is very important. And maybe you'll bring back education and outreach, but we would welcome an additional member, and we can have one if there is a urban forestry commissioner that wants to join our group. I really ask that it not be sort of just to have a commissioner on the committee, but it be someone that's really kind of devoted to large trees and heritage trees. And then the last thing is that we need to do a bylaws update. This will help bring us into alignment in terms of our committee membership and be a place to fold in how we make these decisions. And I just haven't got to it. It was partially done before I joined the committee. Everyone who worked on it was not excited about finishing it. So it has fallen to me, and I will try and do that within the next year. But we'll need to come back to you for a review and official action on those bylaws. Because as far as I know, they've just been developed and used. I don't know that they ever were official in the way that Barbara had the appeals committees laws made official. So that's it. I saw a hand with Daniel, and I don't know if there's any other last comments.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. It's great. I mean, ever since I've been on the commission, Heritage Tree has like gone really smoothly, and I do want to acknowledge that that's no accident. And thank you very much. And Damon too, for your work there. And then also Barbara, the appeals, you've been keeping that running really smoothly for years. So thank you. And it just reminds me, you know, losing 4 people all at the same time, that's going to be huge for this committee. And commission. And I would like to maybe see if we can ask this question of Tony, our contact with the city attorney's office. But if our terming out members would be willing, is it possible that they could continue serving until their replacement shows up? Because we're going to lose, 4 people. Lorena, she's been doing so much serving on different liaison roles. And then what happens if somebody else happens something in their life and they have to leave? We could have a huge number of people leaving. So I would like to see if that's possible, that people could, if they're terming out, they could serve until their replacement is found, because it doesn't sound like we're going to have like 4 new people showing up as soon as everyone leaves. So just wanted to throw that out.
Can I respond to that?
Real quick.
In the past, that's what's been done. And I believe that that's in the code, that it is allowable on the commission. Bruce is nodding affirmative, or he's shaking his head. But it won't work for appeals, because you have to be a member of the commission to be on the appeals board. And I'd be happy, I wrote the rules of procedure, and I'd be happy to help somebody, but you've got to be on the commission to do that particular position.
Now Barbara, my question is, would someone terming out necessarily have to term out if their replacement hasn't been identified? And that would be a legal question to ask.
Yeah, good. Yeah, good point, Daniel. Thank you.
We're wrapping up Heritage Trees right now. I want to move to the annual report that has been kicked down the road a bit. But Greg, and Bruce, is your question directly relevant to Heritage Trees?
Yeah, in the code, my reading of it, it's unclear. There's one portion of the code that talks about urban forestry commissioners will serve until a replacement is found, but there's another section that says there's a limit on their terms. And I would say it's not crystal clear as to whether somebody who's term limited out would be able to keep serving. I don't think
Okay.
the code gives us clarity.
We'll ask Brian and Jen, maybe we could ask you to follow up with Tony, or who our legal support.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, great, thanks. That would be very helpful. Point well taken, Daniel. Thank you. Greg, thanks again. And Greg and the team, thanks so much. Urban Forestry, all the volunteers making this happen. We got a vote. We're moving forward to council, and I'd like to transition swiftly to our annual report for 2021. You've seen a draft sent out by Brian. At this point, we're just really in a conversation about the annual report. You've had a chance to look at it. If there are any comments, questions, responses, redactions, or anything of the like, please, now would be a good time to have that conversation. Barbara, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I have one correction. There are some typos in here. The one that I remember right off the top is on Nick Fish's term. There's an extra 0 in there. It says that one of his terms started in what was it? 20018. So there's, there are a few little things like that. And Bruce, you did a fabulous job on this. The one correction that I have is under appeals board. What else? And Greg, I wish that appeals were always as nice of a topic as heritage trees. But the first line says that the appeals board consists of up to 5. It is correctly, the appeals board consists of 5. And that's in the code. And so what happens is when you don't have 5 people, you still have a quorum if you have 3 people here, and 5 people is an appeals board, just like 11 people is a commission. And, it's just a difference whether you have vacant positions or not.
Thank you for those clarifications, Barbara. Any quick response, Bruce?
I just want to point out, this is the Urban Forestry Commission report for 2020, not 2021.
Thank you.
We're just a little delayed in getting to it, so.
That's right. Thank you. It was put forward in October 2021, but we are delayed by a year and some. That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jen?
Yeah, I'm not sure that folks are tracking it, but there is a comment from Leah in the chat, Vivek.
Thank you for, yeah, if you all want to take a look.
Just for
Oh,
things
great.
like typos, where it maybe doesn't warrant a discussion, should we just email
Yep.
like this page, this paragraph, then, okay.
That
Yeah,
would be.
I think that's
ideal.
fine. I think for today, we could vote to approve essentially the content of the report, and then we can make kind of minor edits after that.
Okay, so Barbara, I think we're ready for a motion.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the report that we have been presented with one correction to the appeals board and with future corrections for typos, etc.
All right, I see Damon's hand. Is that a second?
It's a second.
Great, Damon seconds, and call a vote. All in favor, raise your virtual hand, physical hand. I'm not going to double count if you raise both. All right, looks unanimous. Let me put your virtual hands down, and let me see if there are any nays. Okay, any abstentions? All right, Adrian abstained. Thank you. Noted. All right, so approved. Thanks again, Bruce. Tremendous job. Really appreciate your synthesizing volumes of work and doing it with a lot of memory like lapses that I have from 2020 to 2021. I don't even know what year it is anymore. So thank you so much. Really appreciate that.
And quick apology, Bruce. I should have caught that before, but because I've seen this before, but I didn't.
Yeah, so we'll talk about who's going to do the next one so we can catch up and be maybe up to 2022 and up to date with our annual reports. So a lot of stuff that we're going to have to talk about. I'd like to, before we go to the pedestrian design guidelines, just really like to emphasize that got a very clear signal last time about an interest in retreat and setting aside time to do a retreat. I hope that interest continues, because the idea that I'm gonna chat with Jen and Brian about next time when we're prepping is trying to get a retreat going while we still have the kind of knowledge of the commissioners that are kind of rotating off available and being able to do that earlier in 2022. So that might be February or March. So keeping an eye out for that, trying to get a date and time set aside for that. And we're still in Omicron time now. So it's likely, my hunch is likely going to be a virtual meeting as well. And spending that long time on virtual stuff is something we're going to be talking about. But I'd love your feedback on that. If you have ideas, please send us me a note, and I'll just keep track of retreat details and kind of come out to you as more information is available. With that said, and that will be a chance for us to talk about some of these things in terms of annual reports and rotating and things like that. That's what jogged my memory there. Thinking about priorities, we heard from PBOT about the pedestrian design guidelines, and I want to turn this over to Daniel, who's the chair of the policy committee and has been really bringing together several folks on the policy committee, some of whom are attendees also today, and to talk a little bit about where we are with the design guidelines, a conversation that Daniel and I had recently with the chief of staff of Hardesty's office, Commissioner Hardesty's office, who, as you know, is the commissioner for Bureau of Transportation in Portland. So Daniel, turn it over to you. We have about 15 minutes or so.
Okay, great. Thank you, Vivek. And I just want to double check everybody got a copy of the latest draft letter. So just a little history. You know, we did hear about the pedestrian design guide here at UFC last year, presentation from PBOT. And we decided to, as a commission, that we were going to send a letter with our comments, and we discussed this at the policy committee. UFC approved that letter. We got it in by, at the end of October because there was a public comment period. And then the director of PBOT, Chris Warner, sent us back a response. And the policy committee has been working on a follow-up response to that response, which we're hoping to get a vote at today's meeting in order to send this to PBOT. One important thing I think has happened in the interim, and that is, was it Monday? No, Tuesday, Vivek? Yeah, boy, it seems like last week already, but it was just Tuesday. We had a meeting, phone meeting with the policy director, Derek Bradley, in Hardesty's office, as Vivek mentioned. And Vivek, please jump in on this too. But I think I learned a bit about where PBOT is coming from on this whole pedestrian design guide issues. And I think if I were to kind of boil it down to a few things, which I think can help us as we respond, both UFC and potentially urban forestry as well. What I was hearing was, number one, when it comes to planting trees and looking at space for big trees, what they are finding frustrating now, and this is just a general Bureau thing, is just a lot of bureaucracy involved in everything that they have to do. And I know this is something familiar to everyone who works in the public sector, is that there's just tons of bureaucracy everywhere. So for us to provide some potential ideas and solutions to PBOT, we need to think about providing solutions that don't require a lot of extra bureaucracy, because I really heard loud and clear that was where they were coming from. Another thing, of course, is the cost. He talked a lot about sidewalk repair costs and things like that. So something for us to think about, that we heard that was on PBOT's mind. And I do recognize that PBOT has had discussions with urban forestry. And as Jen mentioned, urban forestry has been involved in for us getting to this point with the urban design guide draft. It sounded like BES had also been involved in the conversation as well with PBOT. But one of the things that we kind of talked about that ended up, I thought, with a good brainstorm, was that even though it sounds like PBOT is not, there was definitely a lot of pushback on a lot of things we were recommending. But this idea of having PBOT have as a goal to make sure that in every city block, we had enough space for 2 to 3 large form trees. That sounded like something he was willing to push with PBOT and with the commissioner's office. And that's why I added that paragraph kind of at the last minute that I sent, even though it's not something we talked about at the policy committee, because it sounded like, you know, kind of in the give and take and that we're trying to do with PBOT, that that might be something they're willing to support. So, you know, got a few comments since then, heard back from Ted Levy, who's on our policy committee, and Damon, thank you for sending some comments. I wanted to have a vote, but also wanted to hear from folks because there's certainly things that we can add, you know, in the next week or so before sending things in. So I wanted just to stop there and see if there's some comments. And I see, Jen, you have your hand raised.
I do, thank you. What is meant by bureaucracy?
Okay, from his perspective, and I understand this having worked for the public sector in the past, is that there's so many laws, rules, and regulations about things that you would have to do in terms of extra paperwork or extra meetings or whatever, that what I was getting from him was just, you know, frustration about not, whatever solution we come up with, not having like new forms to fill out or new this or new that. And, you know, I definitely hear where he's coming from. I also recognize that with all the laws, et cetera, rules, regulations that are in place, that's kind of inevitable. It does come with the territory of working from the public sector. But hearing that, I wanted to mention that to everybody because that's something we got loud and clear at the meeting. And Vivek, did you just wanted to see if you took away any other intuited anything else from the comments that we got at our meeting?
Yeah, I'll turn off my video just in case it gets glitchy again. Just real quick, Jen, that came from a comment about having to asking whether PBOT could consult with urban forestry, since urban forestry are you're the experts on looking at specific trees in situations that might require further consideration. And we were able to get a little bit of movement, but then there was in terms of getting large form trees, 2 large form trees, for example, in a city block, that conversation seemed like it had some traction, but there was just an absolute no-go with any additional conversations that PBOT would have to have with anybody else in the city, because it would slow the process down and it would mire it with more time, which they didn't seem like they were interested in at all.
Okay, thanks for that clarification, Vivek. So the code does require urban forestry to be at least consulted, if not specifications and requirements from the city forester met. So that's just something I'm not entirely understanding the commissioner's staff's comment. It is possible that there are many, many topics that come before any given city commissioner's office. And we don't expect them to know all the ins and outs of city processes or codes. So there may have been a misunderstanding about that. I think what I am hearing in those comments that you heard is that additional steps, like for public notification or extra groups that have to be involved beyond city bureaus, might be what the comment was based on. And I say that because I've heard those a lot from city commissioners' offices in the past. And I'll take this opportunity also to ask that when you're meeting with city commissioners' offices, Daniel and Nick, please let Brian or I know so that we have the opportunity to attend with you, because there's a lot of parts of these things that we're responsible for or have information on that are going to lend to the conversation and any action.
Okay, sounds good. Damon.
My comments that I made to Daniel were just edits on the letter. Focus more on asking for requirements rather than ability to do something. In the past, we've come in kind of nice on things and tried to ask for what we actually want. And I think, or we haven't asked for what we actually want. And when we actually did ask for what we wanted, things changed, and we actually got some code change that was pretty exciting. So I'm going to say, again, let's ask for what we want in this and make requirements, have people make requirements for trees, and just they can figure out how that works. So much of the time, it sounds like things just want to run smooth for the developers and of projects, and so much of the time that comes at the demise of trees, and we just can't stand for that anymore. Thanks.
Thanks, Damon. Other comments, responses, questions about pedestrian design guidelines and ongoing conversations? Megan?
I have a question for both you, Vivek and Daniel. I'm kind of just even curious, like kind of whether it came up at all around just like climate resiliency and like public health, like in conversations. Like I think sometimes in maybe some of the bureaucracy informed conversation, like that, the contextualization of that gets lost. And I'm really thinking about this recently. I just read a book that was this wonderful scientific book that was really talking about how the presence of trees made it possible for humans to live on this earth, like at the very basic functionality. Like it created our environment that makes it habitable for us, right? We think about how we need that to make it better, but like we exist because of trees. And I think people miss that. And so I just don't know if that came up or if they're so entrenched in the, I don't want more barriers, that like that doesn't gain traction. Because I'm thinking about the letter and whether there's a stronger presence of that or not.
Yeah, well, we certainly had that emphasized many times in the first letter that we sent in. I think we've sent that message across. I just think part of what we're experiencing is inherently in this form of city government we have, where we have these, 5 different kingdoms, and when they disagree, there's no way to really come up with very difficult to come up with solutions. So I don't really know how we handle that, but I do think at some point it would be worth UFC talking directly to the city council, the council meeting, and just talk about this larger issue of, with all these changes that are going on now and that are planned for the built environment, whether it be RIP 2 or the Pedestrian Design Guide or Streets 2035, we really have huge threats to the existence of large trees in a lot of parts of Portland. And come on, City Commission, can't we talk about the bigger picture here rather than just piecemealing everything and looking at every little project as separate from everything else? I like to think of how the National Environmental Policy Act works, where you have to consider cumulative impacts. And that's something that the city council really isn't considering every time there's a new project that, where big trees are vulnerable to coming down. It's really is about health, and there's a huge climate justice issue here, in that, we on the commission all know it tends to be the people in the lower income neighborhoods who suffer the most when they don't have access for room for big trees to grow. So, I think it's worth us talking about what we might want to say directly to the city council about this.
Megan, I will say quickly that I asked that question saying, if you get pushback on the idea that trees are a challenge, then have you considered the conversation that essentially says, you are externalizing some of these costs that communities are dealing with by not prioritizing trees in some neighborhoods that have historically not had them. And the response, meaning that you have health-related costs that are borne that were not actually, that we have quantified, but are not being brought up in any of these conversations. And the quick, I thought, curt response was that, that at least we heard was that there's not going to be an argument there, because there's not really a conversation there, because any Portland property owner or resident would be much more affected by the short-term costs related to the fixing of the sidewalk than they would be really even considering the costs of health care impacts over a longer period of time. And so for me, I was just thinking to those surveys we've done and just thinking, asking the question, would you rather have $200 now or $30 a month over the next, over the next 2 years? And it's been very clear in those kinds of surveys that people would prefer the $30 a month over the 2 years, because it accumulates to a lot more money at the end of it, as opposed to the $200 now. So I don't know. I was finding a little bit of challenge coming back from that conversation about trying to frame it in a broader context of the importance of trees. Definitely pushback. I see Jen's hand.
Yeah, just from my experience and also the way things work in the city, anyone can make a comment to city council on any topic they want at any time. All you need to do is get on the list in advance. And I have seen that be impactful, and many folks in town avail themselves of that access to their elected officials.
Yes, thanks, Jen. All right, we're coming up on the closing time here. We've anything else, Daniel, you want to bring up for this particular topic before I think we have a vote to send a letter, is that right?
Yeah, that would be great. Of course, if there are any sort of major thematic changes that we should make over the draft that you saw, please bring it up now before we take the vote. But yes, I'd like to have a vote to send a draft letter, as an official letter to PBOT and the various other people on the CC list.
Okay, Damon, you're gonna put forward a motion?
Just wanted to ask Daniel, is it possible is it strategically not as strong as we were talking about, or should we just, are we thinking about strengthening the requests?
That's certainly something that we could do. Did you have anything in particular? I mean, we could beef up, add a couple sentences more to once again emphasize, this larger picture and the climate issue and all the impacts. We could definitely beef that piece up.
I'm talking about
seeing some nodding of heads here.
My comments about making requirements for larger strips and more planting space that I made in my response. I don't have it with me. I'm looking through my emails for that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm looking at your letter now, that one sentence, that's fine.
Could you clue the rest of us in, please?
Yeah, Damon added a sentence, use of these measures needs to be required or at least incentivized.
I also, in the second paragraph, allowing room for at least 2 to 3 trees per block throughout the city. I wanted to see that change to requiring that, ensuring that innovative approaches are used. In fact, used in the future, please add the language to the guide to ensure that these will be used. I wanted to see that change to required. I wanted to see on the, let's see, on the first page, second to last paragraph, also a note pointing out that these are City of Portland's long-standing tree canopy, that adding large form trees are critical to meeting the city's climate change mitigation strategy and the City of Portland's long-standing tree canopy.
You're frozen, Damon. I don't know if anyone else is seeing that.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
This is frozen to me too. So are we back now?
You're
Yeah,
back.
you're back.
Oh, good, good.
Yeah, we can make those 2 changes. Yeah, I was.
Okay. Did my part about the adding tree canopy goals to the last sentence come in?
No, I didn't hear you say that.
So large form trees are critical to meeting the city's climate change mitigation strategy and Portland's longstanding tree canopy goals. Wanting to add that
Yep.
phrase. You say the key concern is that the draft PDG continues to propose a 4-foot minimum. Was that supposed to be a maximum there? Because I don't think we'd be pushing back with a furnishing zone of 4 feet, a minimum 4-foot furnishing zone. And I don't think they're furnishing zones where we plant trees.
No, that's the minimum. That's the furnishing zone.
Right.
We don't want to have a minimum furnishing zone because it would be great to have a larger furnishing zone.
Right. Okay. It's confusing there.
Right. Yeah, I can see that.
And then just in the second to last paragraph, further proposed design guidelines for furnishing zones actually discourage trees in parts of the city, commercial in mixed use zones. And I just made a comment, how does code do this, or the guidelines do this, and perpetuate existing right-of-way trees in industrial zones? And again, how does the guide do this? If we can point succinctly to the specific parts of the guide that do that, I think that would make it more consumable for the decision makers. So adding a couple more details in there.
Does that work, Daniel?
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry, guys, I don't.
I might, Damon, I might call you up offline and talk.
Sure, yeah, yeah.
Okay, that'd be great. And Greg and Jen, to close us up.
Yeah, I read both versions of the letter, sort of the one with the preamble and discussion and then the actual letter. And I guess I would love some more information. We've sort of had those hints about, you can always go and talk to council, or you can talk to commissioners or their staff. Strategically, would it just be better at this point to ask for a public hearing? So all these people that support trees and large form trees, and they can actually hear them. I know they've done outreach and they've come to us, but it'd be beyond us. And I know from when I was at the Parks Bureau, everyone paid a lot of attention when the commissioner in charge was hearing directly from the public. So again, I'm not part of the policy committee. I know you guys carefully considered that, but I guess the question would be, are we to that point yet? Or are we going to now miss the point where we can make that request?
So Greg, one of the reasons for the change is Ted Labby mentioned to me that the Urban Green Space Institute has made an official request for public meeting, which, as I understand, that once that's been set in motion, there's something in code that for something to be passed as administrative rule does not require public hearing unless one is specifically requested. You know, we could put that back in. We could also even refer to that, you know, we're not the only group making a public hearing request.
If it's been made, we can stay out of it and be the good guys that didn't put them on the
Well,
spot.
that's kind of where I was going with that when I took it out. But
Yeah. No, I didn't know that, so it's great to hear. And I hope we will all participate and recruit.
Roberta Jortner in the chat just said that it would help if UFC requested a hearing as well.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Greg. Jen?
Roberta beat me to the chase there.
Okay.
The commission could also, I'm going to remind you that in my report, when I spoke to the pedestrian design guidelines and urban forestry's involvement, there are many bits of content around that we continue to work on. One that I chose to highlight for your information was at last our request in regards to that 4-foot minimum furnishing zone, AKA planting strip, was that instead there be a 4-foot minimum pedestrian way or pedestrian zone, which is in keeping with federal Americans with Disabilities Act requirements, and flips it basically. That would make more furnishing zone space. That's the intention behind that. We haven't gotten a response on that yet.
Okay, thanks for that clarification, Jen. Daniel, do we have at least a version of this? Do you feel comfortable in calling a vote today, or do we want?
Yeah, I would say let's do a motion to approve the draft letter with the comments that commissioners have given at today's meeting incorporated, and I will figure out how to put those into the actual language. I think we're pretty close.
Okay.
Motion to approve.
Damon's got a motion to approve. Second, looks like Anjanette seconds. Thank you, Anjanette. All in favor? Virtual hand. Oops. All right. Excellent. I see unanimous. So did I miss anybody? Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, wonderful. Thank you, Danielle, and Policy Committee. Great work. This is going to continue a conversation that we kicked off a couple of months ago, and I'm delighted that we're moving on that. Lots of progress, lots of engagement going on right now. Super. Thanks for staying 10 minutes over our allotted time. Really appreciate your willingness to participate. And sorry for the glitchiness of the video, but one last time, I'll hit the virtual gavel with my fist in my hand here and call the meeting to a close. Thank you, everybody, for your input today. We'll see you next month, if not sooner.
Thank you all. Take care.
Bye.